Hi, I'm Dahlia. My parents threw a 40th wedding anniversary party and didn't invite me. Not a text, not a call, not even a lie to cover it up. Instead, they sent me an invoice, $38, for my sister's new Lexus. They forged my name, tied it to a life insurance clause, and called it family support. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing I had been erased long before the invoice arrived. One photo frame at a time, one lie at a time. Why did they choose her? Why did they erase me? And what would you do if your own mother said, "You're not part of this family anymore. You're just the one who pays for it"? I was sitting at my kitchen counter in my tiny Seattle apartment, sorting through bills and grocery flyers, when the email came in. It wasn't from my parents. Not that I was expecting one. It was forwarded from a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who used to be my mom's best friend until they fell out over something petty. Her message was brief. "Thought you might want this." Attached was a digital invitation to my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The banner was gold and champagne, with cursive writing, "Celebrating 4 decades of love. Orville and Velma. RSVP by April 15th. Location, Napa Valley Country Club. Formal attire." I looked at the guest list. It was long. Extended cousins, distant church friends, old neighbors. My sister Eloan's name was bolded at the top under Family Circle. Mine wasn't there at all. I stared at the screen for a good 30 seconds before I moved. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe they were planning to surprise me with something more personal. I opened my inbox. Nothing. No email, no call, not even a text. It wasn't a mistake. When you grow up learning not to expect, it still stings when hope proves you wrong. I sat back. The room too quiet. My breath the only sound. The microwave clock blinked 5:17 p.m. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked. The world kept spinning, like nothing was missing. A few days later, I ran into my upstairs neighbor Jean while picking up a package. She was in her 60s, always cheerful, always a bit too invested in other people's lives. "Oh, I saw your sister's car on Instagram. Wow, that Lexus is a dream," she said, her voice full of admiration. "She had it parked right in front of that vineyard event, didn't she? Looked stunning." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, forced a smile, and said, "Yeah, she gets what she wants." Jean chuckled, oblivious. "Well, it's good to see families celebrate milestones together. You all must be so proud." "Sure. Proud." I went back upstairs, tossed my keys onto the counter, and opened my laptop. Scrolling through social media was a mistake. Pictures from last year's anniversary surfaced. Elowen in a white cocktail dress, laughing beside our parents. I wasn't in a single photo. I didn't remember being invited that time either. Then it hit me. I hadn't been invited to anything since Thanksgiving 5 years ago. That was the last time I saw everyone together. After that, it was always a small thing. Nothing formal. "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come." Absence had become tradition. Later that night, I called my best friend Carla. She was folding laundry while we talked. "You're sure it wasn't just an oversight?" she asked gently. "RSVP cards don't get printed 100 times without someone noticing a missing name," I said. "This isn't forgetfulness. It's precision." Silence on her end. Then, "I'm sorry, Dee. That's cruel. I'm just tired of pretending I'm part of something I clearly never belonged to." The next day, I tried calling my mom. It went to voicemail twice before she picked up on the third ring. Her voice was pleasant, like she'd just stepped out of a spa. "Dahlia, sweetheart. Everything okay?" "I saw the anniversary invite," I said. A pause. Then, "Oh, well, we figured you might not want to come anyway. These events are more for people with families of their own." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "I'm not part of this family?" "Don't twist my words, Dahlia. You've always been so dramatic. This isn't personal." "Sure feels personal," she sighed. "Look, we didn't want to make things awkward. Alawan's been under so much stress lately with her job changes and the house remodel. It was just simpler this way." Simpler. That word rang in my ears like an indictment. After hanging up, I remembered something a therapist once told me. Estrangement doesn't always come with slamming doors. Sometimes it arrives like dust, quiet and hard to notice until it coats everything. That night, I was on Facebook, mindlessly scrolling when I saw a comment on my cousin's photo. Honestly, the comment read, "It's weird how Dahlia never comes to family things anymore. It's like she just disappeared." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. You don't disappear. You get erased. First in conversations, then in invitations, and finally, from memory. I opened my old Gmail and searched Family Thread. The group email chain was still there, but I had been removed 6 months ago. No explanation. Just gone. That was the moment it all clicked. Not just the party, not just the car. This was systemic, quiet, subtle, deliberate. I opened a new email, drafted a message to my parents with the subject line, "So, I guess I don't exist?" I stared at it, read it twice, deleted the second paragraph, rewrote the third. Then, I didn't send it, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I went to check my mail and found something far worse than silence. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and had a subtle texture that suggested importance. The return address was from a national financing company I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then, I saw my full name printed across the label, middle initial and all. A knot twisted in my stomach. I ripped it open at my kitchen counter, barely noticing the sun slipping behind the Seattle skyline outside my window. The contents slid out in a neat stack: a printed invoice, a credit agreement, and a breakdown of fees, totaling $38,046. At the top, in clean professional type, Allowance Dream Vehicle, Lexus GX460, co-signed by Dahlia Rose. Verified. My name. My name. It was right there, bolded under guarantor, with a signature that looked eerily close to mine, but wasn't. I hadn't signed this. I hadn't even known this existed. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood frozen for a moment, the paper trembling in my hands. I sat down slowly, reading line by line, trying to process it. Taxes, registration fees, dealership charges. A note at the bottom: monthly payments automatically drafted from joint approval line ending in 4082. That was my old account, the one I never formally closed, because part of me thought, maybe someday, my parents might need help. Not Elowen. Not like this. This wasn't just about money. This was erasure dressed as obligation. For a moment, I thought about calling Elowen. Then I remembered the way she looked in those Instagram pictures, beaming in her new car, captioning it with, "Manifested this." She hadn't manifested anything. She'd inherited a legacy of theft wrapped in family silence. I stared at the invoice again, this time flipping through the fine print. I wasn't just listed as a guarantor. I was the primary, the person legally responsible if Elowen defaulted. And unless I did something, I'd be stuck paying for her Lexus while she posed in it on weekends like it was a trophy of independence. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and called my father. The phone rang only twice. "Hello? Dad? Did you sign me onto a $38,000 car loan?" Pause. "Dahlia," he said slowly, "I don't see why you're so upset. It's not like you're using your money for anything important." "I'm sorry? You live alone, no kids, no partner. What are you saving for?" My fingers clenched around the phone. "You forged my name." "We filled in the blanks," he replied, as if that were normal. "You've always been the reliable one." Reliable? That word echoed through me like a curse. For them, reliable meant I was useful but disposable, convenient but unworthy of consideration. Not once did he say sorry. Not once did he ask how I felt. It was just transactional. "You stole my identity." "Don't be dramatic," he said sharply. "It's for your sister. You know she's been struggling. It's not like we did this for us." I could hear something in the background, probably Elowen laughing on speakerphone, or maybe just the TV. Either way, he didn't seem concerned. In families like mine, silence isn't golden, it's currency. I hung up. For a long moment, I just stood there. The kitchen felt too quiet, too clean, too removed from the mess I'd just been dragged into. I poured a glass of water and didn't drink it. I paced. Then, I opened my laptop and logged into my credit report. It was real. There it was. $38,000 of new liability, flagged as active, with monthly installments already in motion. My score had dipped. Not drastically. Not yet. But it would if she missed a single payment. And with Elowen, missed payments were as regular as her excuses. I checked my text threads with my mother. 2 weeks ago, she had sent a casual message. "Hey, sweetie, just a heads up. We're working on something for Elowen. Might use your info temporarily. We'll fix it later. Be understanding, okay?" Be understanding. My fingers shook. I reread the message 3 times. That wasn't a request. It was notification after the fact. A gentle slap in velvet gloves. And now, it all made sense. Why I hadn't been invited to the anniversary. Why I hadn't received a single family message about anything significant in months. I wasn't just being forgotten. I was being managed. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything. Dates, emails, texts, invoice amounts. I printed the documents. I circled the signature. I highlighted the forged consent lines. Then I looked at the top of the invoice again. Elowen's dream vehicle. It might have been her dream, but it was my name, and I was just getting started. Because when people steal your name, they're not just taking your credit, they're taking your power. I told myself it wasn't about seeing them. It wasn't even about making a scene. I just needed to look them in the eye and ask a simple question. Why? So, I showed up unannounced at my parents' house in Napa. Mid-afternoon, the air still carried the sweetness of spring. Velma opened the door with a frozen smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dahlia, this is a surprise." "I know," I said, brushing past her before she could block me. "I just wanted to talk." Inside, nothing had changed. Same beige carpeting, same outdated wallpaper clinging to the corners like guilt. But something had changed, and I found it in the hallway, what they called the legacy wall. Gold-trimmed frames lined the wall from top to bottom, each row labeled by generation. Under Current Generation, Elowen's smiling face beamed back at me from 3 separate photos. One of her receiving an award, one posing at the vineyard, and the last one holding her keys next to that Lexus. The space where my name had once been was now filled with a pressed flower encased in glass. A decoration. A placeholder. Even in their home, I had become aesthetic white space. Velma's voice floated from the kitchen. "Would you like tea or—" I ignored her and pulled out my phone, snapping a quick photo of the wall. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand an explanation. What was there to say? A wall of history, and I was wallpapered over. Legacy didn't skip people. It was chosen, curated. I left without finishing her sentence, drove the 3 hours back to Seattle, with the photo burning a hole in my phone. By the time I got home, dusk had settled, and I couldn't shake the smell of old carpet. I logged into the private Facebook group my mom managed, the one where she posted family-only albums. I hadn't looked in a while. I clicked on the latest post, 40th anniversary memories. Rows of images loaded. Everyone was in matching cream and gold outfits. Elowen in the center, her arms wrapped around both our parents, my cousin's kids, the neighbors, the cake with their wedding photo printed on top. I scanned every frame twice, then again. I wasn't in any of them. But it wasn't just that. I found a picture where I should have been, an angle I remembered from every family event. The same corner of the living room, the same spot I used to stand in. Now, a vase filled the space, as if no one had ever been there. Scrolling through the comments, I found one from my godmother, who now lived in Arizona. "Where's Dahlia?" Miss her smile. Velma had replied, "She's distanced herself. We respect that." No. You pushed me out, then sold it as my choice. I stared at that sentence for a long time, then closed the laptop. Later that night, I went through old messages. One in particular stuck out. Last year, I'd sent them a holiday gift basket filled with hand-picked teas and custom mugs. Velma had replied, "So thoughtful, thank you." Alawan loved hers. They'd accepted the gifts. They'd cashed the holiday cards. And still, they erased me from the visual story. I opened a new folder on my computer, labeled it Removed. Then I printed the photos, laid them out on my wall like evidence at a trial. I took a marker and gently circled the spots where I used to stand. The corners, the edges, the second row, third from the left. It was absurdly methodical and maybe a little pathetic, but it helped. Looking at that wall, I whispered to no one. Erasure doesn't scream. It whispers, then fades, unless you trace it back. And I was ready to trace everything, starting with the paper trail. Because if they wanted me out of the picture, they shouldn't have left my signature in their contracts. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the printout of the Lexus invoice spread beside a yellow legal pad. The apartment was still, the air dense with the quiet tension I'd grown too used to. I opened my laptop, logged into my credit account again, and clicked through to the loan section. I needed details. I needed clarity. What I found pulled the breath out of me. There it was, clear as daylight, a clause in fine print. In the event of primary guarantor's incapacitation or death, the loan balance will be covered by a secondary life insurance policy. Beneficiary, Olawin, Rose. My sister would get a paid-off car if I died. I sat frozen, the cursor blinking beside the clause like it was daring me to look away. They didn't just fake my name, they insured it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from that slow, boiling realization that this had never been about misunderstanding. It was method. It was convenience. And I had played along for years by being quiet. I pulled out the old folder I kept in a drawer, containing every document I'd ever co-signed for my family. Mortgage help, a loan application when Elowen wanted to study abroad and couldn't secure financial aid on her own, even a lease agreement for her first apartment near campus. I flipped to the page of the student housing lease from nearly a decade ago. My signature was there, fluid, slightly leaning right, the D in Dahlia curling under itself like a ribbon. The same signature now appeared on the Lexus contract, too perfectly. Whoever copied it didn't just imitate, it was traced, duplicated with care. My own name used like a tool, again and again, under the guise of family loyalty. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is a pattern, masked by trust. I stood up, paced to the window, and stared out at the neighborhood below. Parents walked their kids to school. Dogs barked. A delivery truck passed by. The world went on, unaware that somewhere in a tidy kitchen in Seattle, someone was waking up from a very long, very dangerous dream. That night, after a long day of work where I barely remembered my meetings, I returned home and opened my laptop again. A friend once taught me how to check public lending records. Students often forget their applications are part of searchable databases. It took 20 minutes, but I found it. Alawan had applied for a federal supplemental loan the year before. On the application, under sponsor or family backer, was my full legal name. Same address, same email, my details. I had never seen it, never agreed to it, and now that loan was marked delinquent. My credit had dipped last year, and I'd blamed the bank. I'd spent weeks trying to dispute it, only to be told it was legitimate activity. It was, just not mine. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it The Audit. I began scanning every contract, every message, every bank document that linked back to Alawan or my parents. I took screenshots of texts. I emailed myself copies of credit reports. I printed the Lexus loan and highlighted every place my name was used. I created a timeline. Then I wrote the header on a new page. Documented identity misuse. Case file, Dahlia Rose. You don't go to war unarmed. You document your pain, then you file it. By midnight, I was sitting in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating the edges of my resolve. This wasn't about confronting them anymore. It wasn't even about getting my money back. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed a case. And the first witness I needed to face wasn't them. It was myself. It was almost 1 a.m. when I found myself back at the kitchen table, a second cup of coffee cooling in front of me while rain rattled against the window. The storm outside was oddly comforting, loud enough to drown out the thoughts, quiet enough to keep me company. I hadn't turned on the TV. I hadn't texted a soul. I needed to hear myself think. I opened a blank document on my laptop and stared at the cursor. Then I started typing a list. No title, no headers. Just bullet points, one after the other. I will no longer be the reliable scapegoat. I will no longer confuse guilt with love. I will no longer measure my worth by what I can solve for others. I will no longer stay silent to avoid shaking their fragile peace. I read it over once, then again. Then I copied the entire thing into a Word file and saved it as what I will no longer allow. The next window I opened was my email. I started writing to both my parents. No flowery greeting, no guilt-softening lines. From this point forward, I will not be spoken to in favors disguised as obligations. I am not your backup plan. I am not your financial safety net. I am not Elowen's sponsor, nor am I your moral garbage disposal. Whatever picture you're painting of me to others, make sure you add this. I'm done. I didn't send it, but I saved it, placed it in a folder on my desktop labeled Evidence Family Manipulation. Because even unsent words carry weight when you know what you're saying is true. The rain had settled into a quiet drizzle by then. I stretched, stood up, and grabbed another hoodie before sitting down at my desktop computer. This time, I opened a shared folder from my family's Google Drive, one I hadn't checked in months. It was labeled Tax Files and Joint Approvals. My hands moved faster than my brain could catch up. I clicked into archived documents, scanned through a few old PDFs. Then I saw the subject line in one email, buried in a thread between my parents. Avoiding conflict with Dahlia, Lexus. I clicked it. If we don't tell her, she can't argue, my dad had written. Velma had followed up 5 minutes later. She always reacts when asked directly. Use her name, just don't loop her in. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. I felt the back of my neck go hot. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, stunned at how casual it all was. It wasn't malicious in tone. It was logistical, like they were discussing a work budget, not their own daughter. So this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. I took a screenshot, then another. I backed up the thread onto my hard drive and emailed it to myself under a fake subject line, just in case. Then, I opened Facebook and unfollowed both of them. Removed myself from the family chat group thread on Messenger. I deleted the shared calendar access my mother had linked to mine years ago, supposedly to keep track of family birthdays. But it had been used to assign me duties. Pick up Elowen from the airport, send holiday cards, send checks. I removed myself from the shared Google Photos album. Then I printed the list from earlier, just to have something physical to look at. They keep calling it family, I whispered, mostly to myself. But the only time I'm included is when there's a cost. I sat with that thought for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it finally stopped hurting. The next morning, I took out the trash, watered my plants, and made the best omelet I'd cooked in weeks. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying someone else's weight on my back. And if they weren't going to listen, maybe the Lexus dealership would. Because I wasn't just drawing boundaries anymore. I was building a case. By the time I turned off the lights in my apartment that night, my living room didn't look like a place someone lived in anymore. It looked like a case file exploded across every surface. Sticky notes, printed emails, scanned invoices, old loan agreements. I had pinned everything up along one wall. The corkboard I bought on a whim at a discount store years ago now held the kind of documentation that might make a judge raise their eyebrows. In the center, tacked with a red pushpin, was the Lexus loan agreement. Below it, a snapshot of my forged signature. Highlighted in yellow, primary guarantor, Dahlia Rose. And taped next to it, in a scribbled quote from Velma's text, "Just temporarily using your name. We'll fix it later. Be understanding, sweetie." My definition of family had been misspelled for years. They didn't ask. They assigned. They didn't discuss. They decided. I opened the website of the Lexus dealership where the car had been purchased. Elowen had posted about it in a now-deleted story. "Big thanks to my fam and Lexus Napa for making dreams real." I scrolled to the bottom of the site, found a discreet little link labeled Report Fraud, and clicked it. The form opened like a quiet dare. I sat down at my desk and began writing. Not as a daughter, but as a person who had nothing left to lose from telling the truth. To whom it may concern, my name is Dahlia Rose. I am listed as a co-signer on a recent loan facilitated through your dealership for a Lexus GX 460 under the name Aloe & Rose. I did not co-sign this loan. I never authorized the use of my name, credit, or personal information for this transaction. I'm attaching the following documents: PDF of the full loan agreement with forged signature screenshots of prior messages indicating unauthorized use of my information. Verification of no deposit or payment activity from my accounts. I am requesting an immediate fraud investigation and a formal freeze on the registration associated with this transaction until this matter is resolved. I read it over. No emotion, no rage, just facts. Power doesn't always scream. It signs its name clearly at the bottom of a complaint. Then I hit send. For the first time in days, I exhaled fully. The next few hours passed in silence. I went through my nightly routine like nothing had shifted, but inside, something had. Something fundamental. I didn't feel helpless. I felt methodical, purposeful. At 7:38 a.m. the next morning, I received a reply. "Ms. Rose, thank you for your submission. Your complaint has been escalated to our fraud investigation unit. A member of our legal team will contact you within 72 hours. I read that message 3 times. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to remember what it felt like when someone, somewhere, didn't immediately dismiss me. Later that morning, I left the apartment to clear my head. The streets were still damp from last night's storm, the sidewalks glistening under a rare stretch of sun. I stopped at the corner cafe, ordered a medium Americano, and walked toward the waterfront. At 10:02 a.m., my phone rang. "Ms. Dahlia Rose?" "Yes, speaking." "This is Jeremy with the legal department for Lexus Financial Services. We're calling to verify your current address on file for delivery of updated registration documents regarding the GX 460 vehicle co-signed under your name." I stayed quiet for a moment. He continued. "There has been a flag on the account pending investigation. We are placing a temporary administrative hold on the vehicle's registration during our review. You will receive documentation shortly." "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "Let me know if you need anything else." He paused. "You did the right thing." I ended the call, stood there on the sidewalk, coffee in hand, and let the words settle. You did the right thing. It wasn't validation I needed, but hearing it from someone completely unrelated to the chaos I came from, it mattered. One system might have ignored me. This one didn't. Because sometimes silence breaks on the other side first. It was a Thursday morning when I opened my phone and scrolled through social media with one hand while nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee with the other. The rain had eased into a gray drizzle, just enough to keep the streets wet, but not dramatic. I wasn't looking for anything. Just noise. Background blur to drown out the last 72 hours of emails and fraud claim updates. That's when I saw her. Ilawan, on a morning show livestream, smiling into the camera like she was born for the spotlight. The clip autoplayed, her perfectly curled hair bouncing as she laughed and said, I was able to get my dream car because of the unwavering support of my family. Some of us are lucky to have people who believe in our future. I froze. No mention of the dealership hold. No mention of forged paperwork. No mention of me, the person whose name made that dream car possible. Some of us, I whispered to no one, some of us are unlucky enough to be erased from it. I turned up the volume. The host beamed. That's so inspiring, Elowen. It's beautiful to see families lift each other up like that. She nodded, her voice soft and sweet. I couldn't have done it without the people behind me. The people behind her? I was the paper under her tires. I closed the video and took a breath, forcing myself not to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I screenshot the segment, captured the caption, the date, the hashtags. Then I saved the file in my folder, titled Revisionism. That evening, I opened the family blog again. I hadn't looked at it since the last time Velma posted a Memories album and conveniently cropped me out. But this post was new, an entry called Elowen's Graduation Journey. I read each word carefully. There, in black and white irony, it read, "She made it through on her own merit, never relying on anyone else for financial aid." My jaw tightened. I remembered the 2 years of rent payments I'd made, the utilities I covered, the last-minute textbook orders, the frantic Venmo requests because her card didn't go through. I remembered my mother saying, "It's not a loan, it's family." Apparently, family doesn't get mentioned in the credits. I opened my banking history and pulled every receipt, every email, transfers, confirmation numbers, check images. I added them to the audit folder, organizing them by month and purpose. Then I cross-referenced them with the dates in Velma's post. That blog entry wasn't just dishonest, it was scrubbed clean of me. They didn't just rewrite history, I muttered as I clicked through screenshots. They published it. The following evening, as I left the office and walked home through the soft evening drizzle, I ran into Marianne, a coworker from HR. She gave me one of her usual warm smiles. "Hey, I saw your sister on TV this morning. What a go-getter. You two must be so close." I stopped walking. "Not close enough," I said, for her to remember who helped her stand. She gave me a confused glance, offered an awkward smile, then nodded and walked on. I stood there on the sidewalk, letting the city move around me, and pulled out my phone. I texted my lawyer. "Need to schedule a full update. I've got more proof." Screenshots, records, even public statements. A few minutes later, I got a reply. "Saturday, 9 a.m. Bring everything." I walked the rest of the way home, slowly, calmly. I passed a bakery, the smell of cinnamon catching me off guard. I passed a woman pushing a stroller, humming to a baby. Life carried on. But beneath my skin, something had changed. Not just anger, not even grief. Focus. But the show wasn't over. And the next act? I was writing it. Because if they wanted a performance, I had a finale of my own. The night before the memorial, my apartment was dim and still, but my printer whirred to life like a machine rehearsing for something bigger. Page after page slid into a growing stack. Dealership documents, screenshots of Elowen's messages, the official letter from Lexus's fraud department, and the contract with my signature. Recreated, abused, and now returned to its rightful owner. I wrapped it all in metallic gold paper. Simple bow. No card, just a single note on top in my handwriting. "In case you forgot who paid the bill." I scheduled the delivery for 10 a.m., just as guests would begin arriving at the vineyard for Orville's memorial service. It wasn't out of cruelty, it was choreography. My father always appreciated punctuality. By the time the courier picked up the package, the sky over Seattle had gone from gray to nearly black. I lit a candle, not for him, but for myself. I wasn't mourning. I was marking closure. It wasn't revenge. It was clarification. The next morning, around 9:15 a.m., I received a call from an old college friend, Miriam, now a producer at a local news affiliate. "Dahlia, she said, a little too quickly. Did you see it? See what? Your sister. There's a video going around. Someone leaked it. I thought you'd want a heads up before it explodes. A knot formed in my chest. 30 minutes later, the clip was everywhere. It showed Elowen at a party, drink in hand, laughing a little too loudly. She leaned in toward a group of women near the kitchen island and said, I didn't pay a damn cent for that Lexus. My sister doesn't even know she co-signed it. Dumb, right? But hey, it's family. Use what you got. The laughter that followed wasn't even malicious. It was casual, entitled, like she was explaining how to score an airline upgrade. I didn't post it. I didn't even know who had. But I saved the video, downloaded it twice, and archived the top comments. This is financial abuse. What kind of family pulls that? You better sue them, girl. I didn't comment. I didn't share it. But I watched as it made the rounds. Older women especially, many of whom followed financial abuse recovery pages, latched on fast. They knew what it was to be the responsible one, the stable sibling, the invisible bank account with a pulse. And then the text started. I hadn't planned on attending the memorial, and I didn't. But by 11 a.m., my cousin Sabrina sent me a message. Holy hell! She opened your box during the eulogy. She thought it was flowers. Another ping. Elowen stormed out crying. Velma turned purple. I've never seen a room go so silent so fast. Then one more. Whatever you did, it worked. I turned off my phone. The streets were quiet as I walked through the park near Green Lake, hands in my coat pockets. A few families were out, pushing strollers or sipping coffee from travel mugs. The air was crisp but not cold, and for the first time in weeks, my breath didn't feel like it had to push through something invisible just to be heard. I stopped by the water and sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Ducks floated past. A dog barked in the distance. And inside me, something settled. Some funerals aren't for the dead. They're for the lies we finally bury. And in burying theirs, I uncovered something of mine. Because truth doesn't just destroy, it uncovers what's been stolen. It started with a video. Sabrina, my cousin, sent it just after lunch. No subject line, just a short message. You'll want to see this. I tapped the file, and the screen opened to footage taken from across the street. Handheld, shaky. It showed my parents' front yard in Napa, the pristine driveway I used to roller skate on as a kid. A white flatbed tow truck was angled just enough to catch the reflection of a cherry-red Lexus perched atop the loading ramp. Its back wheels dangled off the platform, straps locked over each tire. In the foreground, Velma stood on the porch, barefoot and red-faced, arguing with the driver. I could barely make out her words, but I knew that posture, arms crossed high, chin lifted like a defense mechanism. Elowen was at the edge of the lawn, phone in hand, visibly crying, but not saying a word. Not to the driver, not to Velma. Just standing there like a statue built from self-pity. Neighbors had gathered. Some peeked through blinds. One woman had her phone out, filming discreetly over the fence. Sabrina's follow-up text came seconds later. They're humiliated and still pretending it's your fault. I watched the clip again. They weren't ashamed of what they did, only that it got seen. I didn't reply to Sabrina. I just closed the phone and leaned back in my chair. The smell of fresh coffee wafted from the kitchen, but it felt detached from everything. Like this moment didn't belong to any regular part of life. It was a footnote in a chapter they thought they were writing, until I picked up the pen. That evening, a letter from the IRS arrived. Brown envelope. My full name on the label. I opened it with the same detachment I now reserved for most things labeled official. The letter was brief. They had flagged my tax file during a routine audit. Apparently, for 4 consecutive years, Velma and Orville had listed me as a dependent on their return. I hadn't lived under their roof since college. I hadn't been financially tied to them since I was 22. It explained a lot. Lower refunds, frozen benefits, discrepancies in eligibility. It was always a little off. Small things I chalked up to clerical errors. I never questioned it. Why would I? I sat on the couch and dialed the number on the bottom of the notice. A man picked up. His voice was calm, professional. I explained what I had just read. He listened, asked me to verify my identity, and then paused before responding. "This is unfortunately common in cases of familial fraud," he said, "especially among adult children who don't know they've been claimed. Most people don't report it, because the perpetrators are their parents." There it was. No fluff, just a mirror. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the quiet. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was focused. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out the binder I'd been building over weeks. The audit, I'd labeled it. But it had grown into something else, something firmer. I laid it out on the dining table. Printed statements, photos, emails, account histories, notarized letters. Each section a wound, each page a scar. Then I opened a new document and titled it, Dahlia Rose, Independent Adult, Not Your Backup. Not your burden, not your bank. I printed the cover sheet, slid it into a clear sleeve, and placed it on top of the binder. I packed everything neatly into a legal box and labeled it with black Sharpie. Legal evidence, 2022, 2024. I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping proof. When I finished, I walked to the kitchen and lit a small candle, the one my grandmother had given me years ago with the words, "Resilience is a quiet flame," etched on the side. I didn't light it for grief. I lit it for reclamation. The world hadn't changed overnight. The damage wasn't undone. But for the first time, the weight wasn't just off my shoulders. It was on record. And what I reclaimed was only the beginning. Because consequences don't just come, they compound. It arrived in a padded legal envelope, tucked among credit card offers and utility bills. I almost missed it. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize, but the name in the corner, Arthur L. Greaves, estate attorney, tugged at something old in me. I opened it on my kitchen counter, the early evening light casting long shadows across the marble. Inside was a letter printed on aged letterhead, a scan of an official will, and a short note from Mr. Greaves himself. "Ms. Rose, I'm reaching out regarding an earlier version of your grandfather, Charles Rose's last will and testament, which had not been publicly filed due to an internal family dispute at the time of his passing. The attached version is the original copy. Based on new legal movement and your recent filings, I believed you should see it." I sat down slowly, unfolded the stapled will, and there it was, in language clear and unmistakable. "To my granddaughter, Dahlia Rose, I leave the vineyard property at 17 Willow View, as well as the contents of Trust C, in full, for being the only one who never asked for anything but always gave more than she had." I hadn't known. No one ever told me. The property went to my parents' name, then mysteriously to Elowin's, then disappeared from conversation altogether. Underneath, Greaves had scribbled in pen, "Your parents redirected the estate. I regret not contesting it when I should have. My apologies sincerely." I stared at the paper for minutes, not moving. It wasn't rage that filled me. It wasn't even betrayal anymore. It was stillness. A confirmation that I hadn't been crazy, ungrateful, or bitter. He saw me. He just never got the chance to say it loud enough. Later that night, I pulled out an old thumb drive I hadn't touched in years. On it was a collection of digitized family VHS tapes. I plugged it into my laptop and scrolled through the folders until I found one labeled Dahlia Graduation. It was grainy, the sound crackly, but the footage was there. A backyard graduation party, balloons taped to folding chairs. My grandfather, Charlie, speaking directly into the camera. "This girl," he said, hand on my shoulder, "is going to go farther than anyone in this family, not because she's loud, but because she listens." Off camera, Elowin whined, "Grandpa, film me now. I'm wearing heels." The camera jerked, swung toward her, and the moment vanished. But not before I paused the video and zoomed in on his face. He was smiling, not politely, but proudly. "You knew," I whispered. "You just didn't know how to protect me from them." The next morning, I called Jareth, my attorney. "There's more," I said. "An original will, a redirected trust, a property transfer. I need to know if we can reopen the estate claim." He was quiet on the other end, then said, "Send it. All of it. This changes the scope completely." I scanned the will, the letter, my own affidavit of knowledge, and sent them off. By afternoon, Jareth confirmed. The case was refiled. The vineyard might be repossessed, or I'd receive compensatory damages. "It's not revenge," I said to him over the phone. "It's record correction." "Whatever it is," he said, "you're doing it with the kind of clarity most people never get." That evening, I printed the original page of the will with my name on it, the page that named me the rightful heir, and slid it into a glass frame. I placed it on my bookshelf, beside the candle my grandmother had given me. Not to gloat. To remember that even when people lie loudly, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. But even justice doesn't always fix everything. It only tells the truth louder. And sometimes, the truth is enough to change the air in a room. Forever. The letter came on a Tuesday morning. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Slanted cursive that tried too hard to be elegant. Velma never could resist overdoing her loops and curls. I hesitated before opening it. For a moment, I thought about tossing it straight into the trash. But instead, I slid a knife along the edge of the envelope and unfolded the cream-colored page inside. "Dahlia, you've humiliated us beyond repair. I hope one day you'll understand that family does what it must to survive. You may believe you're right, but you've broken something you can't put back. Mom." No apology, no ownership, just guilt, polished to look like righteousness. I read it once, then folded it in half and placed it on the kitchen counter. It stayed there for 2 hours while I worked through emails and cleaned out the refrigerator. Some letters aren't meant to be replied to. They're meant to be recognized, then burned. That afternoon, I met Jareth for coffee. We sat outside at a small cafe near Capitol Hill, both of us wrapped in scarves, as the air carried the early chill of autumn. Leaves scattered around our feet, yellow and crisp, as if even the trees were shedding their history. He slid a folder across the table. "Final estate filings, all clean. You're officially out of the case, financially and legally. The vineyard issue's moving to judgment." I nodded, flipping through the pages. Not because I needed to read them again, but because I needed the confirmation in my hands. "You handled it better than I would have," he said, sipping from his mug. "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I wanted truth, and maybe to be seen." He tilted his head. "And do you feel seen now?" I looked out toward the street, at a little boy tugging at his mother's hand as she crossed with him in tow. I used to think I wanted someone to say sorry. Now I just want peace. We talked for another half hour. Not about us. That chapter had ended long ago. But there was a kind of ease between us, like people who had survived different storms and understood the silence that follows thunder. When we said goodbye, he gave me a quiet nod, the kind that says, "You did what you had to do." By the weekend, I had moved into a new apartment, smaller, brighter. The walls were freshly painted, and every object inside was something I'd chosen myself. There were no hand-me-downs, no photos of a family that didn't want to be remembered honestly. I hung one frame on the wall. Just one. Inside it, a quote I'd printed myself. "Some things are not meant to be fixed. They're meant to be left behind." There was no mantle crowded with forced memories. No digital photo frames looping curated smiles. Just space. That Sunday, as light poured through the windows and settled on the hardwood floor, I opened a new journal. The leather cover was still stiff, the pages blank and expectant. I wrote the date, then the title of the first entry, "My Story, Told by Me." And I still had one more thing left to do, one final gift to return. Not to them. To me. It started with an email, another one of those innocuous, dull subject lines from the courthouse that could have easily been ignored. But when I opened it, The words leapt off the screen. Notice of public auction. Repossessed estate. 17 Willowview. The vineyard. My grandfather's land. The one that had slipped through my fingers years ago without me even knowing it was mine to begin with. But now, legally, officially, the transfer of that estate had been deemed fraudulent and the property was going up for public sale. I didn't contest the auction. I didn't file a new claim. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I watched the listings online each day, and when the opening bid dropped low enough, just enough, I placed an anonymous offer through a third-party trust Jareth helped me set up. 3 days later, it was mine. They tried to erase me from the land. I didn't fight to take it back. I let the system do that. I just claimed what was mine. Quietly. Weeks later, I flew to Napa. The sun was bright and almost too warm for late November. As the car drove past the familiar winding roads, I saw it. My parents' old house, looking smaller than I remembered, faded and still. There was a moving truck parked in the driveway. Alawan stood on the porch, pacing with a phone clutched in her hand, shouting into it, her voice muffled by the closed window. Velma sat on the steps, head in her hands. There was no sign of Orville. His name had been wiped from most of the records already, buried under financial judgments and tax liens. But I wasn't there for the house. I didn't buy that. I bought the property next door. When the driver pulled up to the lot, I stepped out, holding my coffee. I didn't make a show. I didn't wave. I just walked past them, quiet, deliberate. I saw Velma look up. Alawan turned sharply, phone still pressed to her ear, her eyes narrowing as if squinting at a ghost. But I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to witness the weight of truth finally settle where it belonged. Later that week, on Christmas Eve, my new house was full, not of relatives, but of people who chose me. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, people who brought warmth without expectation. Someone brought a homemade pie. Someone else brought their dog in a holiday sweater. We wore paper crowns and passed around mugs of cocoa, the lights twinkling just enough to feel festive. A small gift box was passed to me, wrapped in silver with a simple card that read, "You've earned your own legacy." Inside was a leather-bound journal, embossed with the words, "Legacy is what you leave behind after surviving what they tried to take." I smiled, not because it felt poetic, but because it felt earned. After everyone had left, I stepped onto the porch with a blanket draped around my shoulders. Across the fence, Velma's old house was dark. No lights, no car, no laughter. For the first time, I felt no ache, not even curiosity. The next morning, I mailed one final envelope, no return address, no signature. Inside, a single photo, my grandfather and me, smiling at my graduation. He had one arm around my shoulder, the other clutching a camera. I taped a sticky note to the bottom. He saw me, that was enough. Then I walked back inside, brewed coffee, and wrote my final journal entry for the year. I didn't burn bridges, I built my own. And walked it. Alone. Proud. And when people ask me why I live where I live, I just say, some addresses don't hold memories. They hold closure.